Hi everybody, welcome to Week 8. Thanks for checking us out on our fantasy football ranks and video analysis this week. Couple things before I get right into it. I want to remind everybody that if this isn't enough for you, if you still have some questions, every Sunday we're here 10 a.m. With our live fantasy football start and sit question and answer in the comments on the blog at checkdownchatter.com. If you got questions, hit me in the comments here on the video or on the blog ahead of time and we'll get them answered as well. I also want to point out that it is Friday evening. We have a few iffy situations with injuries that may affect the ranks that won't have time to be addressed before we go live with this. And also we've got a weather system to watch, so set your lineups wisely based on all of that stuff. But for right now, I think that these are some ranks that you can really set your lineups to, the ranks that I believe in. And I hope that after I talk about them, you'll agree with me. We're going to start right at the top of our quarterback ranks this week with our number one QB, Peyton Manning. I don't think I need to give a lot of frame of reference here. Manning is having a great season really this year, but he also faces the New Orleans Saints this week. We wrote an article earlier in the week about how this is your fantasy football buffet full of all the gumbo you can eat. That holds true this week on the road in Denver as well. New Orleans can't stop anybody, can't stop the run. We got Willis McGahee really high. We've got our receivers for the Saints really high, but we have Peyton Manning number one. And it's because he's been efficient all year. It's because he plays at home. And while I expect the Broncos to win this game, he's still going to have to throw the ball to keep up with Drew Brees. So lots of opportunities here. I like Peyton Manning to score and to score big. This is a defense that allowed 420 yards and 3 touchdowns to Josh Freeman last week. Could have been more with another yard on Vincent Jackson and a touchdown at the end of the game. So they're yielding yards. Manning is in the perfect position to take advantage of that. You're rolling with him over pretty much every other option. In fact, I think he's absolutely heads and tails above everybody else as your number one this week. Part of the reason for that is the guy in number 2, that's Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers is typically in that 1, 2, 3 position every week. We're not going to change that this week despite the tough matchup against the pretty impressive secondary in Jacksonville. But no quarterback is hotter in the league right now. No quarterback has put up the numbers that Aaron Rodgers has over the past 4 weeks. He's thrown for 16 touchdowns in that span. Of course, one of them was a 6-touchdown effort, but he's still popping out 16 TDs over the last 4 weeks, averaging 309 yards a game. He's got to be started against the Jags this week, even if the Packers are going to run the ball a little bit more. You like him a lot this week, and that game could turn into a blowout pretty quickly, so we want to be behind Aaron Rodgers. With Robert Griffin at number 3, yeah, he's got a road matchup against the Steelers, which isn't always favorable for passing the ball. He also lost his one of his top receiving threats in Fred Davis last week, but he's still going to run the ball. He's still going to get you points that way, and in particular against the Pittsburgh Steelers and their older linebackers, I think he's going to be able to move the ball to the outside either to escape a little bit of pressure or to break off a few big runs. So I don't see anything really intimidating about this matchup for Griffin this week, and I like him to give you some fantasy points through the air and on the ground as well. Keeping with the trend of hitting 1, 2, 3, and 4, we're going to look at Matt Ryan this week. He's got an unpleasant matchup on the road against the Eagles. There's no doubt about that. But even though Todd Bowles is coming in, he's expected to fix the defense a little bit. I think we're going to see some growing pains here, and I think that Matt Ryan can continue his strong play that he started heading into the bye week. Ryan has 900 yards and 8 touchdowns in his 3 road games this season. He might not exactly hit those numbers against the Eagles, the average numbers, but he's still going to give you a serviceable week. He's definitely a top 5 play. He has been all season, and he's going to maintain that this week. Things get a little trickier from here, but at number 7, we're looking at Andrew Luck. And I ranked Luck pretty high last week, and he just did okay. He had a great first half, not much in the second half against the Browns, but I still like the matchup he's got this week. He's facing a Titans team that has allowed the 4th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, and he's going to be in a game where there's going to be points put on the board. I've got no worries about using Luck this week over some other options, some Tony Romos, guys like that. Go ahead and start Luck if you've got him, unless you've got a Manning, a Rodgers, a Ryan, somebody like that to use instead of him. Jumping down a bit now, we're going to look at Cam Newton. Cam slides in at number 15 this week, and I'm just expecting his struggles to continue. I think he breaks out of this sophomore slump eventually. I think that the team figures out how to use him and how to orchestrate their offense, but right now, those struggles continue. He gets the Bears, who just ripped Matt Stafford and the Lions apart last week, and who really has the best overall defense in the league and the second best fantasy defense against opposing quarterbacks. Matchup is not good, particularly on the road for Newton. His legs might net him a few points, but I don't like him to pass the ball very effectively this week, and I think you've got to stay away from him if you've got a better option. Even one guy to consider is the guy slid in right behind him on these ranks. Number 16, we've got Carson Palmer. He traditionally has fared okay against the Chiefs, as have the Raiders. In general, they don't travel all that well, but it is a top 10 matchup. I think it's a game that is going to be closer than people think. The Raiders are going to have to pass the ball. I think you could do a lot worse than Carson Palmer this week. One guy worse that you're keeping out of your lineups at all costs. I don't exclaim this as a great sit-em play, and I'm not trying to act like a genius here because you're thinking it already, but don't put Alex Smith in your fantasy lineup. If you're in need of a bye week QB, you've got other options. You've got Carson Palmer, some of the other guys between, say, 14 and 18 on our list. Just don't start Alex Smith. I don't know if it's the finger issue, I don't know what it is, but he hasn't been hot the last 2 weeks, and really hasn't done much very positive in recent weeks, and it's not going to get any better this week on Monday night as he faces a really tough matchup against the Cardinals defense. 49ers are going to win that game on Monday night, I have a feeling, but not on the strength of Alex Smith going deep over their cornerbacks, so keep him out of your lineups if you at all can this week. That's it for our QBs. We're going to jump right in now to our running backs, and you'll see I've got Chris Johnson second on my list, which is the highest he's been this season, much higher than last week, much higher than the week prior. I'm not overreacting to that 190-yard effort against the Bills, not overreacting to the 2 TDs that could have been 4. What I am doing is recognizing the matchup here. He looked to have good vision, first of all, against the Steelers the week prior, then he broke off a big game against the Bills, and now he's getting another top 5 matchup against the Colts. There are going to be points scored in this game. After last week, the Titans are foolish not to try and ride Johnson, and he's probably only an RB1 when the matchup warrants, but it definitely warrants it this week, so I'm starting him as my number 2 option. I think I'm going to be happy with it. Another guy that I've had quite a bit lower for most of the season, but it's becoming more and more difficult to deny him, is Frank Gore. I've got Gore slated in as our number 7 back this week. He's coming off 2 of 3 games where he's posted 16 fantasy points or more, and the Cardinals, while strong through the air, as we mentioned, have yielded a few big games to the Bills' combination of running backs and to Adrian Peterson, in recent weeks. So they're coming off a couple of tough performances, and I think Gore's going to continue that trend, really take it to the Cardinals on Monday night. He's a primetime player. Number 8, Alfred Morris. There's not a lot to hate about this matchup, not a lot to love about it either, but you do have to expect the Redskins' game plan to focus on him quite a bit with Fred Davis out, with maybe some more 2 tight end sets, but more about blocking than about catching the football. So I think you can use Morris with confidence against the Steelers this week. He's only had 2 and 3 catch games on the season, nothing exciting there, but maybe they look to him as a check down option a little bit more again with Davis out of the lineup. He's been consistent all year. He's a guy you want to use. I've got Jamal Charles a lot lower than most fantasy experts rank him this week. He's still inside the top 10, still a very startable commodity, but I think we have to be conscious of the fact that Brady Quinn is now in the lineup. It means a couple things. It means if the Chiefs are smart, they're probably making Jamal Charles a big part of their game plan. They're going to feed him the rock. They're going to look to him in the passing game. That's all fine and good. But even though the Raiders have yielded 7 catches or 7.5 catches to opposing running backs through their games to start the season, I think it comes down to the fact that Brady Quinn is starting at quarterback, and until he proves it, we're going to have opposing defenses stacking the box against Charles, taking away Kansas City's best offensive weapon, forcing the quarterback to beat him. Maybe he does, but this week we're going to see the Raiders up nice and tight against Jamal Charles, trying to keep him in check. He's still going to have his opportunities. He's still going to catch a few balls, but don't count on a monster week from Charles this week. Number 16, I like Darren McFadden for what it's worth this week, but he gave us a lackluster effort against the Jaguars last week. You wouldn't know it from watching him play, but they really are a weak fantasy run defense, and we've got Alex Green heading in there to take them on this week. Green Bay is going to win this game, right? I don't think it's going to be close. Blaine Gabbert, if he's playing, he's hurt. We got Rashard Jennings, who is not Maurice Jones-Drew. Jags are going to have a hard time keeping up with the Packers. What that means is that they're going to shut it down in the second half. We're going to look to Alex Green to carry the load quite a bit in the fourth quarter for the Packers. He's going to have lots of opportunities, and I think this is the week that he gives us a really exciting stat line. He's a starting running back for an awesome offense. He's got to be used. This week against the Jags, I think things set up really well for him. He's definitely a mid-range RB2 at worst. Right behind him, John Dwyer. Some questions about whether Isaac Redman gets involved in this game or not, but Jonathan Dwyer is still the number one option for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he had a nice game last week, 122 yards rushing, looked pretty good, and the Redskins have given up 12 points or more to a single opposing rusher in their last 3 games. And while they're pretty good on defense against the run, they're also likely without tackle machine London Fletcher this week. That's going to give them more problems shutting down the run. Means that we have to like and respect Jonathan Dwyer in this matchup this week. Again, you're not rolling him out there as an RB1, but he's a very serviceable RB2 in a pretty thin week at running back this week, particularly with 2 big names going in the game on Thursday night. So go ahead, roll with Dwyer, roll out Alex Green against the Jags. Enjoy that with your running backs this week. Now, looking at the wideouts, I've got to admit that the matchup data is pretty neutral for the Falcons wide receivers, if not bad, this week. They're taking on the Eagles. They're on the road. And Roddy White, I've got him in there at number 2. Part of that was because of the other options below him. Jordy Nelson, is he going to play? Is he not? I don't know. So we put White in at number 2, but we also have to acknowledge that even though the Eagles are good against the pass, we've seen some number 1 wideouts fare quite well against them. Megatron had a big game. Larry Fitzgerald, Victor Cruz, all of them scored better than 13 fantasy points through the first 6 games of the season for the Eagles. So while they're tough against the pass, there's still big play opportunities out there for WR1s, and I think Roddy White is going to be able to find that this week. It's the same story for what it's worth for Colson against the Broncos. I don't love him going up against Champ Bailey this week, but there's going to be a lot of points in this game, and WR1s have done pretty well against them. Welker, Andre Johnson, Roddy White, and Mike Wallace all have posted 10 points or more against the Broncos this week, so you can use Colson, particularly if Jimmy Graham's out. We're going to have Drew Brees looking to him a lot again in this one. Number 7, we've got Mike Wallace, whose name I just mentioned. Gotta love the matchup against the Washington Redskins. It's why we've got Big Ben pretty high on our list. They're giving up an average of right around 33 fantasy points per game to opposing wideouts. Mike Wallace, he had some drops, he had some issues last week, but Big Ben says he trusts him just fine. He still caught 8 balls, so I think he's going to continue to look his way this week. Maybe they get away from the dink and dunk and get into some opportunities down the field for Wallace. So I think he's very usable against the Redskins, and I think you're going to like what you get out of him. Everything in the middle is kind of dicey. Guys could go a spot or 2 higher, I understand. But we're going to jump right down now to number 26. And speaking of a guy that could go either way, we've got Malcolm Floyd. The Browns can't stop the pass this year. They're still among the league's most giving defense to opposing wide receivers. But Joe Hayden did manage to have a positive impact in his second week. First week back on the field, not so good. Second week, he really locked it down against Reggie Wayne last week. Again, particularly shutting down the Colts in the second half. And this week, we've got the Chargers going through 3 time zones, heading on the road to take on the Browns. Floyd's still going to get some targets. He's going to get some looks. But he's just got 1 touchdown this year. Really no overwhelmingly exciting games. And despite the matchup against the Browns, I don't love him to put up a lot of points, but he is going to be serviceable. He's right in that WR2, wide receiver 3 range is usable. Just don't expect something that the matchup suggests you should get out of Floyd until we see it out of him and Phillip Rivers this season. Josh Gordon, another guy, we've got him ranked right behind Floyd at 27. That puts him in the wide receiver 2 or high-end number 3 range. He's got big upside, there's no doubt about that. Last week I spent a lot of time talking about how you can't trust a guy who only catches 3 balls a game to score every week, but then he went out there and he got the touchdown. Eventually that touchdown streak dries up, there's no doubt about it, but this week we've got Brandon Weeden throwing him the ball. He's going to have those 2 to 3 catches, and he's got a really good chance of turning it into a TD off the arm of Weeden, because he's facing the Chargers, who's given up 14 passing touchdowns per game, or on the season, that's more than 2 per game. So the Chargers are very easy to score on, and Brandon Weeden's got no one else to throw to, so I think Joshua Gordon can easily get back into the end zone this week, and I think he's starting because of that. Number 29, we've got Jeremy Curley. He's coming off a big week against the Patriots secondary, who travels to London without half their guys, it seems like, this week. So that's worth mentioning because we like our Rams receivers, but we also have to like Jeremy Curley, who has another soft pass defense. He's got a top 10 matchup against the Dolphins, who are also down a number 1 corner this week. So Curley's very startable. He could go higher than this 29 range pretty easily, but he's going to get you maybe 80 to 100 yards, and he's got a chance of popping one in for a score. So we like Curley this week. He's definitely startable. Get behind him. Move in lastly and quickly to the tight ends now. At tight end, it's worth noting this week that basically everybody in the elite sort of top 10 starting status has an awful matchup this week. It's just how the fantasy gods have chosen to play it heading into week 8. Maybe you started Kyle Rudolph already on Thursday night like myself in a couple spots and you're not feeling too good about it. But it's worth noting that all your elite options have tough matchups. So takes a guy like Heath Miller, moves him into my number 2 spot. I like Miller this week for the Steelers. He's not in that elite class, but he does have an elite matchup. Again, he gets those Redskins who are giving up 12.1 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, coming off a game where Ben Roethlisberger looked his way a lot. He had 2 touchdowns, and really he's had, I think, 4 of his 6 games have been over 8 fantasy points this season. Again, last week much higher than 8, and Roethlisberger's going to look his way again in a matchup that's very beatable for the Steelers pass. You've got to start Miller and feel pretty good about it. The only other guy I want to mention at tight end is Jermichael Finley. I've got him much higher than I've seen on a lot of expert lists this week, and it's because if there's ever a time we're going to see Finley get it going, get back into that sort of where we drafted him range, it's going to be this week in a game that potentially they're going to blow out the Jags, and he's going to be without Greg Jennings for sure, Jordy Nelson maybe. He's going to get more targets that way, even if Nelson plays and he's injured. So we like Finley this week. He could sneak into the end zone, make you look real smart for starting him as a guy who probably is sitting as a TE2 right now. That's the end of that. Was a bit of a whirlwind. Thanks for sticking with us through it. Don't forget, check us out on Sunday morning, 10 a.m., checkdownchatter.com. Get all the advice you need heading into game time, and as always, good luck this week.